considered the 55th Psalm last time we were together. And you'll notice some of the words in the superscription of these Psalms have not been translated. That is to say, they simply anglicized the Hebrew word and left it as it was, untranslated. And in most cases, the meaning of these words are somewhat obscure, and we pointed out last week that there is some thought that that part of the superscription which comes before the title of the psalm, notice in Psalm 54, for instance, it says, to the chief musician on Negonas. Now, in some of your margins, there will be an explanatory note, which is a probable translation of that word, Neginoth. And then there's this word, Nashil, which also has a marginal translation, instruction. And you'll see this Nashil, a Psalm of David, before a number of the Psalms. Now, as we pointed out, there is some thought that, in that, for instance, in that 54th Psalm, the part that says, to the chief musician on Negonas, Nashil, that part of it actually should be a subscription to the previous psalm. And that this psalm would really start out with a title, a psalm of David when the Ziphites came and said to Saul, doth not David hide himself with us? Now, we said that you get the precedent for that in the book of Habakkuk, which has within the book a psalm with a superscription and a subscription that would be comparable to these that you have in the Psalm. And so if this is the case, in these Psalms of David, you have this, beginning with the 56th Psalm, you'll notice it says, to the chief musician upon Jonath, Elam, Rehoboam, and then it says Michtam to David. Well, obviously, a lot of those are just anglicized Hebrew words for which we're not real sure we have a translation. And you'll see this Michtam in a number of these Psalms. You'll find it in the 56th, the 57th, the 58th, and so forth. But what we're going to be most interested in is the historical explanatory note that comes after the name David, the Michtam of David, and then when the Philistines took him in Gath. And we pointed out before that of the 150 Psalms, there are 14 that have this historical annotation that places the setting of the Psalm as it was written in the historical account, either in 1st or 2nd Samuel, most frequently in 1st Samuel, but some of them have the historical setting in 2nd Samuel. And we pointed out also that most of those 14 Psalms that have the historical annotation come in this series that we're studying just now, that we've been studying for the last few weeks. Now tonight, we're going to be looking at this series beginning with Psalm 56. But as has been the case quite frequently, they are not in their chronological order as we have them. If you took, now of course Psalm 58 does not have a historical note, but 56, 57, 59, 60, all of those do. But if you were going to take just this group here, 56, 57, 59, and 60, actually the chronological order would begin with 59. That is the earliest of the Psalms that have a historical setting. That is, you would find that one earliest in the book of 1 Samuel. And so that's why we're going to start with that one tonight. We're going to start with 59, it says that when Saul sent and they watched the house to kill him. Now, the setting of that is in 1 Samuel chapter 19. And we might look there for a moment. Now, any of these that have an annotation, a historical annotation, you'll not find any of them previous to the 19th chapter of Samuel. This would be the earliest one. You can see in the annotation again, it says, when Saul sent and they watched the house to kill him. Then in 1 Samuel 19, verse 10, and Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him. See, that's where you get this, the annotation. And to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. Now, to give you a little background, you'll remember that David had come to sing in Saul's court. He'd come to be his official musician, you might say. And he had slain Goliath. He had already, previous to that, been anointed king by Samuel. Saul didn't know that at the time. Saul knew that he was being rejected by God because Samuel told him that he had been rejected and that God would find another, a man after his own heart. But David knew that God had promised him the kingdom, but he was willing to patiently wait for it. And when the people began to acclaim David for his great exploits, this made Saul quite concerned because he wanted his son Jonathan to succeed him as king. That would have been the normal thing. Jonathan, though, being a godly man, knew that God had instead chosen David. And he wanted to assure David that he would be a loyal subject rather than a rival for the kingdom. But this didn't suit Jonathan's father Saul at all. And in this series of chapters, you'll find that on several occasions, Saul conspired to kill David. And some of them were rather infamous. For instance, here, in order to get the opportunity to kill David in an opportune way, he even gave David one of his daughters to marry. And then in another time here, he sent him into battle against what would seem to have been insuperable odds, but David came back with having slain 200 of the Philistines, and he was just the more widely acclaimed by the people. So we're told in these chapters here that Saul actually feared David, and the reason that it's given that Saul feared David was because he knew that that David had been selected to be king. See in chapter 18 of 1 Samuel, verse 12. And Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul. You find that repeated. Verse 15, wherefore when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. So David was forced to flee for his life. And when he fled, he ended up in the hands of the Philistines, who were the enemies of Israel. And he tried to make friends with them so that they would, so that he could have a place to stay. But the servants of the king of the Philistines warned the king against David, and so David feared for his life, and so he acted like a madman, so that he might fool the king into thinking he was just a crazy person and let him go. Now that account is in the 21st chapter. See, the setting for Psalm 59 is in the 19th chapter, 1 Samuel. Then the setting for the 21st Psalm is in the 21st chapter, and you'll read a few verses there so that you can get the idea of the setting. 1 Samuel 21, verse 10. And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said unto him, Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000? And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and traveled on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. And then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad, wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? And so David fled from the Philistines and hid in a cave. And that is the historical incident, beginning there in chapter 22, with some of the other Psalms. For instance, in Psalm 57, the subscription, or the historical annotation of David when he fled from Saul in the cave. So you see, you have your order here would be Psalm 59, then 56, then 57. Now there were a number of these psalms that had their setting in chapter 22. For instance, the 7th Psalm did, and the 54th Psalm did, and the 57th Psalm. And we've covered those together at another time, including the 57th Psalm, which would have its setting in chapter 22. So the chronological order of these tonight would be first 59, and that's why we want to consider that one first. Now, you'll understand that there is a way in which Saul is typical of the tribulation Jews, and David, Saul is typical of the Antichrist during that time, and David is typical of the Jews. At first, the Jews were will be brought right into the government of the Antichrist, and he'll protect them. And then he'll turn against them and seek to slay them, and they'll have to run from him. And there's a parallel there. There's also a parallel between our own selves as Christians and Satan. Satan being the one that pursues us, and we being the ones that would be seeking God's refuge. So here we have in Psalm 59 this Psalm of David as he has just escaped and they watched the house to kill him, or at the time that he was under this warning where he was going to have to escape. And he prays unto God, Deliver me from my enemies, O God, defend me from those who rise up against me, deliver me from the workers of iniquity, and save me from bloody men. For lo, they lie in wait for my soul. The mighty are gathered against me, and not for my transgression, nor for my sin, O Lord. In other words, the reason they're after me has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a criminal or anything like that. They run and prepare themselves without my fault or outside of the scope of any fault of mine. Awake to help me, and behold, thou therefore, O Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, awake to visit all the heathen. Be not merciful to any wicked transgressors. It's interesting when David calls upon the Lord, he calls him by his various names. For instance, in the first verse, he calls him Elohim. In the third verse, Jehovah. And in the fifth verse, Jehovah Elohim, and then Elohim of Israel. So he's calling him by various names there.
Verse 6. They return at evening, they make a noise like a dog, they go around about the city, behold, they belch out their mouths, swords are in their lips, for who, they say, doth hear? In other words, they don't have, he's speaking of Saul and his cronies, that they don't have any thought that God is watching them and that he's going to take them to task for using these sinful means to hunt down an innocent man. Verse 8, but thou, O Lord, shalt laugh at them, thou shalt have all of the heathen in derision, because of his strength will I wait upon thee, for God is my defense. What he's saying is that I can't fight him, and so the only thing David knew to do was to flee out of the hands of his enemy until God took up the battle against him. Verse 10, the God of my mercy shall prevent me, God shall let me see my desire upon mine enemies. Now, in the King James Version, in this 10th verse, we have this word prevent, P-R-E-V-E-N-T. Those of you that have the new edition of the Schofield will see that the word prevent has been put over into the margin, and the word meet has been substituted in NWT. And some of the others of you that might have some other translations will see that the word prevent has been changed into another word. This is a rather common word, this word prevent, in the Psalms. You find it occasionally in other places of the Bible. But here, it doesn't have the meaning that we would give to it. It has its old English meaning. Those of you that have studied Latin will recognize that the word prevent comes from two Latin words, one meaning before, pre, and one meaning come. So it means to come before. Prevent means to come before. Well, now, in the English language, the meaning got turned around, and here's how it got turned around. This is the account I read, and it sounds plausible to me, so I'll pass it on to you. Back in the days in England, when they had castles and dukes and all such as that, each lord or duke had his own troops to protect his castle. There would be a moat around the castle, and there would be watchtowers on which one would watch across the hills to see if any enemy troops were coming. And the king would have a secret exit under the moat, and if the watchman saw the enemy coming, he would have a special guard, and they were called preventing troops. And their job was to go out another way, like an escape route, and then form an ambush before the oncoming enemy, while the enemy thought that everybody was still back in the castle. And they would come in ahead of the enemy forces and keep them from getting to the castle. So you can see they were called preventing troops because they came in before, or they came in ahead of the enemy troops. And the word the change got because they, in our terminology, prevented the enemy from getting to the castle. So to come before means means to hinder or withstand. And if you realize that change in the language, you can understand what he's saying here. In this 10th verse, he says, the God of my mercy shall prevent or come before for me. In other words, God will be my preventing troops. Here's the enemy coming after me. God will form the ambush. God will get in ahead of the enemy and keep them from coming to me. In that respect, the God of my mercy shall prevent me, means do for him the same thing that the preventing troops would do for that castle to protect them against the enemy. Now let's look at 2 or 3 other places where you see that same type of language, and maybe it'll help us to understand it. For instance, in Psalm 79, you have the same word. Psalm 79, verse 8. O remember not against us former iniquities. Let thy tender mercies speedily prevent us, for we are brought very low. Now, the thought of the psalmist here, this is Asaph, and he was talking about a time when when the children of Israel had gone into much wickedness, and Asaph knew that God was a holy God, and that he would have to judge such wickedness. So what he's saying is, I know that you're going to have to come in judgment, God, but let your tender mercies be our preventing truth against your wrath against our sins, if you see what I mean. In other words, we need something to come. You're going to march on us and consume us because of our wickedness, and we need something to come between you and us. So let that be your tender mercy. Another psalm that has this same word is Psalm 88, verse 13. But unto thee have I cried, O Lord, and in the morning shall my prayer prevent thee. Well, now you see, if we didn't understand how this word prevent had changed meaning, that wouldn't make any sense at all, would it? Let's just think about the word as we generally use it today. And for him to say, but unto thee have I cried, O Lord, and in the morning shall my prayer prevent thee. Well, we don't want to prevent God. But what he's saying is, my prayer shall come in between me and you. And it will be there to prepare the way, so to speak. Or it will come up before you. It's sort of like this. In human terminology, God is going to start out in the morning about his day's work or his day's activity. And before he can go anywhere and tend to his other business, David's going to have a prayer there in front of him to stop him so that he'll consider David, or this psalmist here. And that's the idea. Now, I suppose the most notable passage in the New Testament where this word is used is in the rapture portion in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And it causes a little problem there unless we realize what the word means. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 15, for this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them who are asleep. Well, we can't precede them or come before them, because the dead in Christ are going to rise first, see? In verse 16, for the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive. So, in our terminology, if we use this word prevent, like we normally use it, wouldn't make any sense at all, would it? But if we understand how the English word coming from the Latin was originally used, then we can understand it. We have a similar situation in 2 Thessalonians with the word let, which came to mean an exact opposite. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7, for the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. Well, what is meant here is hinder instead of let, almost the exact opposite. Well, I also read how this word changed its meaning in the English language. The first roads were toll roads, and the person who made the road would have been a landowner, and he would build a road across his land, and then anybody that wanted to use the road would have to pay a toll. And each road would have a gate before it came onto that landed lord's property, and that gate would hinder or bar the passenger from going through until he paid his toll. And so it was the word let meant to hinder. Now, or stop, or prevent, or bar. And the man who tended the toll gate was called a letter, or one who let. In other words, he guarded the bar and saw that nobody got by until they paid their toll. Well, as soon as they paid their toll, what would he do? He would raise the gate and they could go through. So in our language, he would let them go. See? In the old use of the word, he would let them, that is, bar them from going. And then when they paid their toll, he would permit them to go through. So he would, the letter was the person that permitted you to go through. He was the guy that stopped you from going through, but when you paid your toll, he was the guy that permitted you to go through. And it caused the word just to have a turnaround. The letter let us through. See? Well, that's just an interesting little comment. Now, most of you, I've told both of that before, and you've heard me say it before, but for those that didn't, well, you need to understand how some of these words change their meaning. Now back to the 59th Psalm. And what we're talking about here in verse 10, the God of my mercy shall come before me like the preventing fruits, and shall let me see the desire upon my enemies. In other words, the enemy's coming to attack me, and I've got somebody who's going to ambush the enemy, and that somebody is my God. And that's what he does for us in regards to Satan. I suppose the very best example of this would be the story of what we're talking about when it applies to us, would be the story of Abraham and Melchizedek. You remember God had promised Abraham that he would be a great man and that the kings would bow down before him and he would rule over nations and so forth. And it wasn't too long after that until Lot was taken captive. Abraham's nephew Lot was taken captive. And Abraham was necessary to take his 300 and some servants and go fight 5 kings with all their armies and release them, release Lot. And so he was successful. He realized it was God that made him successful. And the king of Sodom had been taken captive, and he was so thankful that he wanted to reward Abraham. And he was going to bestow great riches upon Abraham. And Abraham, in his natural thinking, would have probably assumed that this is the way God was going to fulfill his promise. But while the king of Sodom was on the way to see Abraham, Melchizedek prevented. He came in between and explained the situation to Abraham, told him not to take anything from Sodom, that he was to look to God for his reward and not to man. And then so after Melchizedek left, then the king of Sodom came, and Abraham wouldn't receive anything from him. Now you can read this in the 14th chapter of Genesis. But this is an example of how God comes before us to prevent, to keep us from being unduly attacked by our adversary. In Psalm 59 again, verse 11, say them not, lest my people forget. Scatter them by thy power, and bring them down, O Lord, our shield. Now what David is saying here, it's not so much, God, that I want you to kill Saul or to kill my enemies, but what I want you to do is to show the people, make an example of them, and show the people that you're in charge. They think Saul is in charge. And so don't slay him, lest the people would forget, that if you just killed him, that was over with, so the people wouldn't realize that God's in control. But scatter them by thy power, and bring them down, O Lord, our shield. For the sin of their mouth and the words of their lips let them even be taken in their pride, and for cursing and lying which they speak. Consume them in thy wrath, consume them that they may not be, and let them know that God rules in Jacob unto the ends of the earth. Now some of this almost sounds contradictory, but what David is asking God to do is to show the people that God is in charge. Well, now God has already had David anointed king, and the people are going after Saul. And so this is what David has in mind. Verse 14, and at evening let them return, and let them make a noise like a dog, and go round about the city. Let them wander up and down for meat, and keep on looking all night if they are not satisfied. But I will sing of thy power, yea, I will sing aloud of thy mercy in the morning. For thou hast been my defense and refuge in the day of my trouble. Unto thee, O my strength, will I sing, for God is my defense, the God of my mercy. Now, here's this young man. His wife has just warned him that her father, he was married to the king's daughter, her father was going to try to slay him, and he is placing his trust in his God as he flees for his life. Then in Psalm 56, we find him, after he's been hunted, he's all by himself now, and he's been hunted, he's found himself in the hands of the enemy, and he alternates between despair and songs of trust. I suppose in our terminology, we would say it's almost like he was whistling in the dark, but he knew who he trusted. And so this 56th Psalm, you see, comes after he's fled, and after he's found himself in the hands of the Philistines, and then after he's escaped out of their hands. And he says, be merciful unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresses me. Mine enemy would daily swallow me up. For they are many that fight against me, O thou most high. When I am afraid, I will trust in thee. Now, when we read the account back over in 1 Samuel 21, David said he was afraid. And here he says, when I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. When he had plenty of flesh trying to do things unto him. Now this is going to be a refrain. You'll find it again in the 11th verse when we get there. Verse 5, every day they wrest my words, all their thoughts are against me for evil. In other words, David, it explains to Saul, he says, look, I want to be a faithful member of your kingdom as long as God is pleased for you to be king. And Saul would take his every action and word and turn it against him and try to use it to slay him. Verse 6, they gather themselves together, they hide themselves, they mark my steps when they wait for my soul. Shall they escape by iniquity? In thine anger cast down the people, O God. Thou tellest my wanderings. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? What David is saying here looks like everything's going wrong, and about all I'm doing is weeping. But God, I believe that you see every occasion upon which I sorrow. I believe that you see every tear, just as though you were gathering them up and putting and keeping them for safekeeping. And he says, every misfortune I have, everything that would bring a tear is in your book. That means it's in your hand. You know all about it. It looks pretty bad, but it's all in your care. When I cry unto thee, then shall my enemies turn back. This I know, for God is for me. In God will I praise his word. In the Lord, here again he's using the various names for God. In the Lord will I praise his word. In God have I put my trust. I will not be afraid of what man can do unto me. Thy vows are upon me, O God. I will render praises unto thee. For thou hast delivered my soul from death. Wilt not thou deliver my feet from falling, that I may walk before the Lord in the light of the living? Now, David is saying this. He's saying, now, I know, God, that my eternal soul is in your hands. And I know that my soul is not going to perish. And that's not my fear. But it looks like you're not even going to let me walk upon this earth. And you've anointed me king. And so he's more or less asking the question. He says, won't you please deliver my feet from falling, that I may walk before the God in the light of the living? I know you've got my eternal soul in mind, but how about my very existence on this earth? Am I not going to be permitted to fulfill the assignment that you've given me in being the king over Israel? I want to walk in the light of the living. He's sort of saying, look, I'm too young to die, and my whole life is ahead of me, and things look pretty black. And you'll have to remember, up to this point, David was all alone in his wandering from the king. Now, if we were going to go back in 1 Samuel and start reading right from this point, we would be reading at chapter 22. Let's go back there and let's look there, and you see how God provided for him, so he wouldn't be all alone. This is how God answered those prayers. See in 1 Samuel 22, verse 1, David therefore departed from thence, that is from the Philistines, from Gath, in this episode we read earlier, 21, and he escaped to the cave. Now, this cave, he wrote a lot of psalms. There's a number of them that mention that, and we've already covered those. Escaped to the cave, Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thence to meet him. His brothers came and his father came. Verse 2. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. Now, you've heard the phrase, the 400. Well, this is where it comes from. They provided David with the 400 elite. It wasn't long before he had more than 400. Look at chapter 23, verse 13. Then David and his men, who were about 600, rose and departed. And God gave them a great victory. So what happened? All of these gathered themselves around David. And there's quite a lot in the historical books about the valor of these men that surrounded themselves, surrounded David. And this is how God undertook for David in answer to his prayers when he was so alone. You see, when he escaped, he was by himself. When he fell into the hands of the Philistines, he was by himself. And then God began to send companions to be with him and give him a rather formidable army. And you remember, as you read the story, he had two opportunities to slay King Saul, and he didn't take those opportunities. Now let's look on at Psalm 57, and we notice in the title where it says, when he fled from Saul in the cave. So the 57th Psalm has its setting immediately after the 56th Psalm. But we've already done the 57th Psalm, as I said, but I would like to say one thing about it. You'll remember, we found some of the Psalms that were quite similar, or maybe almost identical. For instance,
the 14th Psalm and the 53rd Psalm are alike. And also the 18th Psalm is the same as the 22nd chapter of 2 Samuel. And isn't that, did I remember that right? Yes, it's the 18th Psalm in 2 Samuel 22. Then in this 57th Psalm, the last 5 verses 5 through 11, now watch this note. See this verse 5, in Psalm 57, see verse 7 through 11. Jesus says, my heart is fixed, and then it ends up in verse 11, be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens. Now, hold your place here and turn to Psalm 108. And you'll notice that the last 5 verses of Psalm 57 are the same as the first 5 verses of Psalm 108. Then, if you look at Psalm 60, you'll find that verses 5 to 12 in Psalm 60 are the same as verses 6 through 13 in Psalm 108. To put it another way, Psalm 108 is composed of 5 verses from the 57th Psalm and from 8 verses of the 60th Psalm. And then you have all that passage repeated in the 108th Psalm. And there's several other Psalms where part of a Psalm will be utilized in another Psalm. But this 108th Psalm is composed entirely of portions from Psalm 57 and from Psalm 60. Now we move on to Psalm 58. You notice that does not have a historical title. But there is something somewhat interesting about it. Psalm 58 starts out, do ye indeed speak righteousness, O congregation? Now, in the New American Standard, this would read, do ye speak righteousness, O ye gods, instead of congregation. The word there is Elohim, the plural of Elohim, which is sometimes translated God. It means the mighty. And I don't know why they translated it congregation here in the King James Version, except that it really doesn't make sense to translate it gods unless you understand that fairly frequently in the Bible, judges are called gods with a little g. Because you see, God is the only real proper judge. He's the only one that can really judge. And and when a man judges, he's operating in the stead of God. Now, Christ himself commented on this, and we're going to get into this a little more when we are studying the 82nd Psalm, because it's all about judges on earth standing in the place of God. But as a preview, we might just look there a moment and notice how Christ comments on it in Psalm 82. Verse 6. Now first, you see, it's all about judging. Let's begin with the first verse of Psalm 82. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. Now that's where you get the transposition here, the relationship between the word congregation over in the 58th Psalm and here. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. Well, this is, he judges among the judges.
how long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Speaking to men. Verse 6, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but ye shall die like men. In other words, there's a sense in which God called you, has been placed in the position of human judges. He calls you gods, and yet you're really men, and you're going to die like men. Now, Christ commented on that in the 10th chapter of John. This is a rather interesting truth in Scriptures, and it's commented on in a number of places. And it's rather hard to understand unless you put them all together. In John chapter 10, Jesus said in verse 30, I and my Father are one. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Now, why did they do that? Well, it's going to explain. Jesus answered them, many good works have I shown you from my Father. For which of these works do you stone me? The Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, and because thou, being a man, makest thyself God. See, they said, we're stoning you because you're claiming to be God. Now look at the answer of Christ in verse 34. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods? If he called them gods, that is, human beings, unto whom the word of God came, and the Scriptures cannot be broken, say ye of him whom the Father hath sanctified and set unto the world, thou blasphemest, because I said I am the Son of God. And he says, it doesn't seem to bother you that these men that are being described in Psalm 82 are called God. Then if they're called God, why are you so excited that I call myself God? So he refers to that rather strange method in the Bible of referring to a judge as a god and a human judge as a god. Now this has its roots way back in the book of Exodus, where they appointed judges. We won't take the time to go there now, but now let's put this Psalm 58 in that perspective. Do ye indeed speak righteousness, O ye judges, or O ye of the congregation who sit in the seat of God, in that you're to mete out justice? Are you doing it righteously? And do you judge uprightly, O ye sons of men? Are you doing this thing right? Verse 2, yea, in heart you work wickedness. You weigh the violence of your hands in the earth. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. Now here's another truth, which is not too well liked in our time. The Bible teaches that from the very moment we're able to assert ourselves, we're going away from God instead of towards God. Before we could make an intelligent decision, we still were insisting that we be the center of attention. And when we first cried for attention, you see. And the very first time we consciously had an opportunity to choose between telling truth and lie, we lied. Before we could talk, we lied. And you say, how did we do that? Well, by making Mama think we were hungry or we needed some attention when all that we wanted was to be the center of the stage. From the womb, we go astray. As soon as they're born, you say, well, this speaks of the wicked. Well, who is a wicked person? The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they are born. Well, let's just look back over at Psalm 53. And it says in verse 3, every one of them has gone back. They are altogether become filthy. There's none good. No, not one. See, God looked down from heaven upon the children of men in verse 2, to see if there were any that did understand and did seek God. No, all went astray. Remember when we were back in 36th Psalm? The transgression of the wicked saith in his heart, there's no fear of God before his eyes, and no regard for God. We have that attitude from the moment we're born. We don't regard God, we regard ourselves. And we have other scriptures. For instance, look over it in Psalm 119, the very last verse of that longest of the Psalms. Psalm 119, verse 176. The psalmist says, I have gone astray like a lost sheep. Seek thy servant, for I do not forget thy commandment. I've gone astray. Isaiah 53:6, all we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned every one to our own way, to his own way, and the Lord hath laid upon him the iniquity of us all. Someone has pointed out that verse, that 6th verse of the 53rd chapter of Isaiah, begins and ends with the word all. And that inasmuch as it begins with all, it certainly is a blessing that it ends with all. See, all have gone astray, and God hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. So one is as inclusive as the other. The provision is as wide as the need for the provision. Unfortunately, the many for whom the provision has been made have not and will not seek that provision. But we go astray as soon as they are born speaking lies. Back in Psalm 58, verse 4, their poison is like the poison of a serpent, and they are like the deaf adder that stops her ear, which will not hearken to the voice of charmers, charming never so wisely. In the East, they've always had snake charmers. But there are some snakes who will have nothing to do with the sound of the charmer. There's a certain type of asp, or I believe it's actually a species of cobra, that they say is deaf. He won't pay a bit of attention to the sound of a charmer. And so what the psalmist is saying, that these who go about their own way and do the type of mischief that a poisonous serpent does, have no regard for anything. They just go on and do their mischief, and it doesn't make any difference how anybody tries to keep them from their pathway of biting everybody with their venom. They will not pay any attention to the charmer, and they go on and do their work anyway. Just like a deaf viper that will not be charmed. So the psalmist is invoking the power of God on such. In verse 6, break their teeth, O God, in their mouth. Break out the great teeth of the young lions, O Lord. Let them melt away like waters which run continually. When he bends his bow to shoot his arrow, let them be as cut in pieces. What this is saying, when the wicked man draws his bow in order to shoot his arrow, let the arrow be a broken arrow. Like a snail which melteth, let every one of them pass away, like the untimely birth of a woman, that they may not see the sun. Let them be, he says, like a child that's about to be born, and let him be a stillbirth, just like that. Before your pots can feel the burning thorns, he shall take them away as with a whirlwind, both living and in his wrath. Now this is the thought here, that the wicked are like someone who has gathered in the desert had gathered thorns and to heat a pot full of flesh that he's going to cook. And the righteous are in the pot, so to speak. And the wicked wants to stew them for dinner. And so what the psalmist is saying here is, well, before the flaming fire from the kindled brambles can do its work, will send the whirlwind, God, and put out the fire, so that their mischief will not be accomplished. There's much of that figure of speech in here. It has its setting in the geographical locale, of course. It says, he shall take them away as with a whirlwind, both living and in his wrath. Some of them will get their just due in this life before they go to the grave. But others, it will be when the wrath of God descends upon them in judgment, looking forward to the future judgment of God. Verse 10, the righteous shall rejoice when he sees the vengeance. He shall wash his feet in the blood of the wicked, so that a man shall say, verily, there is a reward for the righteous. Verily, he is a God that judges in the earth. Now, we pointed out before that this subject of rewards is a favorite subject of our God. We found it back in the 19th Psalm, you'll remember, when we were studying the Word of God, and we were told that those who keep God's words shall have great recompense of reward. This is what God said to Abraham in that passage we were talking about. Abraham, I will be your exceeding and great reward. When God speaks of rewards, he uses superlative words. You remember in the Gospel of Luke, when he's saying, if you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, leap for joy, for great is your reward in heaven. Then there's another theme that runs all through the Bible in connection with the rewards. Surely his reward is with him. When he comes, his reward is with him. We find that a couple of times in the book of Isaiah, in prophetic scriptures, for instance, in the 40th chapter, and you find it in the very last book in the Bible, the very last chapter in the Bible, Revelation chapter 22. Surely I come quickly, and my reward is with me. Well, rewards, the subject of rewards is a favorite subject of God, and the psalmist is proclaiming here, God will reward the righteous. So, although it seems that many times those who are trying their best to do right are the hunted ones, so to speak, and the ones who would seem to be having it the worst, that we're supposed to be like the psalmist and believe that we have a God that's going to prevail. His whirlwind is stronger than the flames of the brambles, and although we seem to be in the pot, fit to be stewed, God's going to take the situation in hand. And though it would seem as though the wicked had an arrow already in the bow, and the bowstring had been pulled, that God can break the arrow before it ever leaves the bow. He's in charge. And that's what we're supposed to trust in. It may be true that there's no charmer that can charm the wicked, but God can stop him. God can break his teeth like breaking the teeth of a young lion, as it says here. This Psalm 58, when you search out the meaning of the figurative language, it certainly does have its share of picturesque speech. Reader's Digest has a portion that says picturesque speech. Somebody ought to send them some of these verses from the 58th Psalm, because there certainly are colorful examples of speech. And what I would do, I would get two or three good translations of the Bible and read this 58th Psalm in several of those translations and see if you can get the full impact of some of this figurative language where it speaks of the serpent that won't listen to the charmer, and the young lion with the broken teeth, and the broken arrow, and the snail that's melted, and the child that doesn't ever see the sun because it doesn't ever come to birth, or the pot with all of the burning thorns under it that shall be taken away like a whirlwind. It's just part of the makeup of the Psalms. So next time when we come together, we start by considering the 60th Psalm. So we're progressing along. Father, we thank you for this book, and we pray that we would diligently spend that amount of time which is necessary for us to understand what you're saying, and that we might apply these words to our own life. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.